not just Punta Gorda. What's happened, I guess the previous city councils, I won't blame you all, is that you've managed to make this, I get the feeling you want Sun City, that you want just a retirement community, that you don't want young people to come here, you don't want young families. It's like they're being discouraged. And so I, for one, am going to say that I will be in favor of this project so that we can again have a multi-generational population here, so that we can have young families come in, so that we have children. We're losing children in our schools, so that we can have children here again, so that we can have a community that was like the community that you said you all came here for. And so I urge you to vote to make us multi-generational again. I'm 72, so I'm part of the elderly group. But I love to see young faces. I want us again to be the community that you say you moved here for. And so I asked you to consider making us again not a Sun City, but a city Punta Gorda, like the old fishing community, the community that came together, that was united and not separated. Thank you.
Thank you. Applause, please. Next.
My name is Sarah Smith, and I have been sworn. And I have lived in Punta Gorda since 1998. And I have come to speak on this issue before this council now. This is the third time. We moved here knowing that that property was owned single family. All of us that bought our property, built our homes, relied on that. We feel like it's a contract. It is commitment. You are our elected officials, and we look to you to fulfill that commitment. We recognize that legally the council could approve this PDV. It does not fulfill the requirements of a PDV. The council has the discretion, and I feel the responsibility to determine the proper density of this property. We elected you. We want you to fulfill your responsibility. Thank you.
Randy Thomas, I've been sworn. And my wife and I just purchased a home here in Punta Gorda in April. And we are back for a couple of weeks to try to fill it with furniture and things like that. One of the reasons we picked Punta Gorda is because it's about the size of a city back in Wisconsin where I have my summer home. That was Sturgeon Bay, about 9,000 people. What I liked about Punta Gorda, rather than going to Fort Myer or some other of the bigger cities, is they drove right by us. It's small, it's easy to get around. And I'm not saying I'm old, but I do like, the traffic patterns where you can get around and not worry about someone cutting you off in town like they do on the Highway 170, I-75. So I really didn't prepare anything. I think that development is good, but Punta Gorda doesn't have high-rises. But when you start building condos, they're high-rises that are spread out. No, they're not high, but they are still there. So I would encourage the city council to take this into consideration. Akiasta is pretty busy already, and the traffic is pretty fast. And so maybe the city council needs to look at widening that street, regardless of what happens to this property. But I picked Punta Gorda to retire in, and I'm hoping that it stays that quaint little place that I thought it was when I purchased. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm going to give the last and final call for public comment. So if you plan to speak, I've made 3 calls for public comment. You may form a line behind the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Hi, my name's Mike Gage. I recently moved to Punta Gorda from Naples. I also kind of gravitated towards the small town feel. My family, they're Canadian snowbirds, so I get the perspective up north, and I kind of want to tell you about Brockville, Ontario. It's another small town community, similar demographics, and like Punta Gorda, they had something special. They really tried to protect it, and they wanted to limit development. When you walk down Main Street now, it's depressing. There's 1 out of every 5 businesses that are still open. They've lost their identity. They tried to shield themselves, and they lost it all. Now the only thing you can recognize is the Walmart, the TGI Fridays, the Chili's. They tried to stem all development, and now it's just a drive-by town. I don't want to see that happen to Punta Gorda. I moved here because, there is something special. There's an identity here that we need to protect, but in order to protect it, you need to foster a healthy amount of sustainable growth, not just shut down everything. So I encourage council to support the development of the Akiasta tract of land.
Thank you.
Harvey Goldberg, I have been sworn. I love hearing what young people like this have to say. And yes, the council does have a responsibility to the community. The council has a responsibility to the entire community, not just a segment of the community that lives in PGI or in this particular neighborhood that may be affected or is tangent to this development. The council has a responsibility. I don't need to tell you, because I've been up there also, your responsibility to do what's best for the overall health, wealth, and the future of the city. This development meets that criteria. I'm stunned by people who, when we have our city staff and sworn testimony of experts say, these are the facts, this is the comprehensive plan, this is the future land use map. This project meets this criteria, yet there are those who disagree with that. I mean, how do you disagree with the facts? Don't bother me with the facts. I know what I want to believe, and I don't confuse me with the facts. I'm sorry to say that. I don't mean to insult anyone, but it's a dilemma. We have a responsibility to support our city. Goodness knows how much it's going to cost our city and our city government and our city residents to pay for what has happened after Hurricane Irma with the canals and the seawalls. Our budget, understandably, is not all that healthy. We continue to draw on our reserves to put into our budget. That's not a healthy budget, and it's not a healthy city. We need to take that into consideration. The taxes, the revenues, and everything that will come with this development, with the construction and the people who will move here over time, is going to be healthy for our city. Yes, we want to maintain it as a quaint little charming town. There's nothing in this development that violates that desire and that interest. And I encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the very last call, so if you're not behind her, I'm guessing you don't want to speak.
My name is Alina Chanteva, and I have not been sworn in. Sorry.
This is a record today, I think.
Anyone else? Last
No,
call.
Last call.
Last
no-
time. Okay, no, I'm just kidding.
Close it out.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in today's proceedings?
I do. Change is hard, and I think a lot of people just stick to that. While being very young, I've experienced change on many levels. I've moved from a very large city to a very small city where I graduated with 30 people in my class. And then I had the honor of moving to Punta Gorda. While it took a little bit of adapting, I've adapted. And I think a lot of people are scared to adapt. By nature, we are adaptable. Doesn't matter what's thrown our way, just like stories I hear about Hurricane Charlie, we all adapted, we all came together, just like we did this past week. I have gotten experience the best and selfless people this past week on how to come together, and it all comes from this small town. However, I also think this town thrives of talent and passion and different generations they're bringing together. I work for a large advertising agency, and I do a lot of hiring for them. And what I see is people don't want to move to the lovely town of Punta Gorda because there's no places to live. And I think multifamily condominiums will aid us so well there, where there's things to do, the pool, the bike trails, everything, something I love to do, something my friends love to do. My mom, who's 60 years old, she loves to do that kind of stuff. But the living situation is so narrow, it's so narrow-minded that I think that's where the problem is. And I promise you, we will adapt, and I promise you, you will get used to it, and it'll, yeah, gets better.
Thank you. Okay, that was the end of the public hearing, so we need a motion.
I have a question before we do.
Yes.
If we close the public hearing, does that mean we as council cannot ask questions of the applicant and their team?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, as Ms. Wexler is about to advise us, that she reserved her right to do rebuttal.
Rebut, yes.
And I think that if you have questions of the either staff or the applicant's experts, the public hearing needs to remain open so that
Okay.
testimony can be part of the public hearing.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a question in regard to the word scale. At our last, in November, I brought up the issue of particularly the perimeter, where we have Buttonwood Village and we have the manufactured homes, and then we have a three-story over parking. And I realize there is what it looks like a buffer. I guess when I was using the word scale then, it was really trying to make sure that things were not towering over smaller buildings. How will we, and these all look like they're pretty much the same, what kind of buffering will we do to make sure that those people who have smaller properties don't feel like this is overpowering? What kind of, are we going to plant big trees that grow 50 feet tall, those kinds of things, and what are we going to do? Because it's a concern I have.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I remember the discussion about scale. Part of that was because the buildings that were proposed in last PD were considerably larger than these buildings. They were the same height, but they were considerably larger. These buildings meet your code and in fact are consistent with some of the larger buildings. This is an actual Google Earth photo. So you see in terms of like the buildings here, and if you can see over there as well, they're of the same length you get because we've superimposed our buildings. You don't completely get the apples to apples, but it's pretty darn close. One of the things that we are looking to do, as we said, as you look at the site plan, you can see, and you can see it better here than when I show you the line drawing, you can see that we've left significant green space. There's already existing vegetation, the existing vegetation that are not exotics, because we are required to remove exotics, will remain. We will supplement that with additional trees, the idea being to create that buffer. Similarly, you have the green space here. Again, it's a long way from the single family till you get to the buildings that are over here. The lake, the green space, additional landscaping, all intended to create that buffer. We intend to leave, and the site plan shows vegetation and a buffer that will be planted in addition behind the mangroves. Mangroves have to remain, mangroves grow, you know, they have to remain. Behind that, we will place some additional vegetation. It's not going to cover, I mean, it's a three-story over parking building. It's not going to cover it, but we're not as concerned, and I know this is a concern for those that live in the condominiums, but from a compatibility standpoint, along this location, you have condominiums adjacent to condominiums, and the scale and the height and the size of the buildings are identical to what is permitted on there, and identical to many of the, not all of them, because you have some smaller and two-story buildings there, and I recognize that, but you have a mix, and this is consistent with some of the buildings that you have here. Along with the single family here, the single family, as I showed in the earlier slide, looks out all this single family, either looks at an existing buffer where those mangroves, as testimony was presented, grow to 30 to 40 feet. The only difference, the only exception to that would be those here who look out over a boat basin, and then beyond the boat basin to a significant green area, much of it preserve, again, existing vegetation and those mangroves that grow to a height before you get to the condominiums there. So we think that the site plan has taken into account where we're adjacent to single-family. We have moved the buildings as much as possible, tucked them in, utilized the existing vegetation to buffer them. Where there wasn't the large preserve, we have created areas, again, because of the angle that you see here. This is all the area that was left. It's where the nest was that was never verified as an eagle, but we left the 300-foot diameter around it in case of that. So you have that large green area. So the only space that you have less of that would be here, and we have created a buffer that far exceeds what would be required under your codes for any other multifamily adjacent to single-family development.
So isn't it true, though, your wetland preserve also includes an additional buffer that
Yes,
you will be planting?
Yes, the wetland, when we talk about the wetland preserve, it is both wetlands, as Ian testified, wetlands and upland buffers that will be preserved and planted to some extent. I mean, there's not a tremendous amount of planting that is required there, but that's in addition to the actual landscape plan and the buffers that we've left around the perimeter.
Any other questions, Nancy?
No,
Gary?
that was it.
Just a quick question to be clear. Mr. Hamilton brought up the case that there would probably be some seawall, I assume, for the docking facility, not for the others, and that we have an issue here. You're not going to really be pushing any dirt for at least 18 months, so I would assume that we wouldn't need to have any seawall for the docking facility installed prior to a 2-year period. Would that be correct?
No, number one, no seawalls are really proposed along where we're proposing the parallel
I understand that. I'm
docks.
talking about the docking facility itself, where you're going to put the boat slips. I assume you're going to have to.
Not even, it's not a guarantee that we'll have a seawall there as well. There are alternative ways of riprap
Okay.
and various other ways
Okay.
to.
The point being is if you were to put seawalls in, you wouldn't be putting it in for a couple of years from this date, so that we would have time to repair our seawalls in town.
I don't think we would be able to get through the amendments to the permits and things that we need to do that to be able to get there.
Just to clarify, the city spoke this morning that they're planning to pour our panels on our site, so
Right.
there are private contractors that, I'm sure can handle the private loads.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes?
Jerry, in the package that we received, and correct me if I'm wrong, it indicated that the price point on these units is going to be in the $450 range, is that correct?
That's what their starting point's at about $450 is what they expect.
And I only bring that up because there were a couple of comments made in the citizen comments about encouraging younger people to come into the community and that sort of thing. This is not exactly a price point for younger families. It's not affordable housing or workforce housing.
No, I'm pretty certain if we had proposed that, you would have denied that out of hand.
I just wanted to bring that point publicly. It's kind of important because some people are expecting it to be something that's going to encourage a younger demographic to purchase these units, and I don't see that happening.
But I think the valid point was made that it does provide a different type of housing. There is an overabundance of single-family housing, and this will provide a multifamily type of housing, and that does create more diversity in your housing stock.
I'm sure this is gonna come up in your rebuttal, but the number 191, are you gonna speak to that in your
Yeah,
rebuttal?
the 191 comes from the site plan that was submitted as part of the permitting for the Water Management District and the Army Corps of Engineers. That permitting was done not by my client, but by the bank that took over this project in the interim, because they felt that having those permits in hand would add to the value of the project, which it does. We will have to, and we've always stated this, we'll have to go in and modify, because that 191 is not our site plan. We will have to go in and modify the permit, but we do not have to go back through the permitting process. You have a permit that is in hand, and that 191 will have to be modified. That permit, however, the Army Corps of Engineers and the Water Management District, they don't dictate what density on a property is, and they will not look at your, we could submit, and Ian, I maybe let Ian come in, because you can submit any kind of a plan to get permitting, and that's a little bit of what was done in terms of being able to get through the permitting process. Ian?
Again, for the record, Ian Vincent and Jerry stole most of my thunder on this. What she said is exactly correct. I actually did the permitting for the previous owner, and it is not unusual for any project. Whenever you're someone who does not intend to be the ultimate user, you typically develop a footprint. You come up with this is where we would like to see development, and that way you're able to identify wetland impacts, wetland preserves, the amount of impervious that's going to be allowed on a project, the amount of stormwater that's going to be required for a project. As Jerry said, the Water Management District and the Army Corps, for that matter, the Water Management District does not regulate uses or densities. They truly don't care if you're going 1,000 feet high and making it whatever you want to make it. They care about impervious areas, stormwater management, wetland impacts, and flooding. And the Army Corps is even a little less specific, that they really truly just care about the actual wetland impacts. So that 191 acres was, 191 units. Sorry, it's been a lot of numbers and I haven't had lunch yet, so blood sugar's dropping. 191 units really was based on a footprint because the bank needed to get it entitled to have something that they were able to sell. As most of you know, this is not unusual. I have multiple projects right now that I'm on my third, fourth major modification for. The Tucker's Grade parcel at I-75, we've gone from commercial to industrial to residential to commercial. So it really is not unusual, and I don't think that anyone, myself or anyone else on the team, has ever been trying to mislead anyone by saying, we have our permits, we're ready to construct tomorrow. I think we've said all along, we fully recognize both of those permits are going to have to be modified.
And wouldn't you advise to wait for some type of approval from this body before you would move forward and spend more money to get a permit for something that's not even approved by the local government?
Exactly. It is thousands and thousands of dollars in engineering and everything else, and the last thing you'd want to do is, imagine the scenario where they went through the process, got this plan approved, and then you guys said, no, go single family. So you don't do it until you have at least one of the birds in the hand. I do want to speak just a little bit about this conversation about, there's 49 acres that's not developable, and Mr. Levin said it very well, in that with the Water Management District and the Army Corps, I cannot say this enough, there is nothing that would prohibit them from developing the entire property under their rules. As Ms. Matthews very clearly pointed out, yes, they would have to mitigate. It would not be a project that I wanted to work on because it would be difficult, but there is nothing that would prohibit it. So it is important to keep that in mind, that I think it was Mr. Brown who said that it was being deceiving to say that we're being good people by preserving those wetlands because it was preordained. No, it's not. We know we're going to have to go in for a permit. If we didn't have this site plan, if you made us go to single family, we could potentially go back in and go, hey, we have to go single family. We need another 100 units. We're going to impact another 20 acres of wetland, and we would get there eventually. So I just wanted to get that on the record. And Ms. Matthews, one thing you pointed out, talking about, and I don't know if it's Miss or Mrs., I apologize. I instinctively go to Miss.
I answered a lot of things.
I don't want to call you Lynn because that's just a little too informal. And I'm joking around, I lost my, you brought up the idea of saying, well, let's look at what the real density on this property be because 49 acres is being preserved. I've been involved with multiple counties and helping with comprehensive plans and land development regs and all these things to deal with how you do balance that. And the problem is, I think it was Mr. Levin who said, if you had a property that was all wetlands, you certainly would not want to prohibit, you wouldn't as a city say you can't develop anything. So you have to allow some form of development. Whenever you cross into that world, and I had this conversation with the county, back in the Inga days, when you cross into that world of saying, if I preserve it, it no longer counts toward my density, you are absolutely incentivizing the developer to impact more wetlands. Because if I say, this is a perfect property, I have 100 acres, I have 49 acres of preserve, but I have however many, 500 and whatever units of single-family density that I can cluster, and I can preserve my wetlands. As soon as you say, well, okay, you have preserved the wetlands, and that no longer counts toward your density, and I'm getting 5 additional units for every acre of wetland I'm allowed to impact with, guess what? My 49 acres just became 15 acres because I need that additional density even if I am clustering. So I understand what you were saying, but there is a reason that I would say uniformly across Florida, municipalities do include wetland preserve acreage in the calculation for base density. So, boy, I rambled a lot. I apologize. Like I said, blood sugar's low. If you guys have any questions, I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any?
I have a
Gary?
question for staff.
Yes.
Back in the November meeting, when we discussed the very first
the
one, and
public hearing.
we discussed the numerous traffic concerns relative to Kia Star. Kia Star is rated as a D, and would this impact that's rating? And we also talked about, as the other properties get developed that would also require a Kia Star as access, that could sometime impact. And there was discussion that we would preemptively or proactively look at what we needed to do in the future to improve Kia Star and its active. And as I recall, there was a gentleman in the office who from the state said we just need to get it on a list so at least we can start talking about it. Has that in fact occurred? And
Yes,
what
it
is
is.
the status of anything that's happened since November?
It is on the list, and it will be addressed during the updates to the long-range transportation plan.
Great, thank you.
But
Yes.
let's be cautionary here. It may get on a list.
And may not happen for 20 years.
I mean,
I understand that. But it is an item for discussion, and it is something that we're proactively at least looking at, rather than being reactive.
Yeah,
20
no.
years from now, say, oh my goodness, look
no,
what
no,
we
no,
gotta
no,
do.
we
it's
went
there.
forward.
That happened
did.
right after the November hearing.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just wanted to be clear for the rest of the audience
Yes.
and for ourselves, just to make sure that we were going that way. I actually knew the
The
answer before I asked
MPO,
it.
I saw the MPO officials here, so they're listening. Yeah,
Yeah,
there
it's
he
on-
is. He hears us.
It's on the MPO's long-range plan as an unfunded project far out. And we just got that added in August,
Yes,
right?
yes. Gary Harrell, Charlotte County, Punta Gorda MPO. A Kia Star widening to 4 lanes is on the needs plan for the long-range transportation plan. And it is, as discussed, an unfunded need at this time. We don't know where funding's coming from.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we can close this
Well,
public
we
hearing?
still have
Oh,
rebuttal from Jerry.
Yeah, just a comment relative to the price point that was mentioned. And there was a comment about, we might not approve it if it was not a certain, I'm not so sure about that. I think that we need diversity in our community. And I think that diversity of price point would be healthy for us so that we have a diverse community. And so I think, that's just my own 2 cents worth. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up first Reed Fellows, because most of the comments that I heard had concerns about traffic and how the numbers were arrived at, and he can address that.
Reed Fellows, once again, for the record, I have been sworn. I just want to address a couple of comments that I heard in regards to the traffic study that we did produce. As I had said before, this is a traffic report prepared by my firm, signed and sealed by myself as a professional engineer. You talked about common sense and just grabbing numbers out of the air. That's not how we deal with reports. We use fundamental transportation engineering principles, and based upon those, we come up with not just the formulas we plug in, but the ratios. And we do a common sense smell test after that, looking at the numbers and deciding, hey, does this make sense? And in general, I've been practicing traffic engineering for over 20 years. The residential trip generation rates really haven't changed that much over that time period. What we use is called the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Handbook to come up with these rates. And then you use the dwelling units and look at all those in comparison. That's where we come up with the rates, and that's where we get a difference between single family and multifamily. Now, we're about to come up with the 10th edition of our handbook, and the things that actually seem to be changing as far as residential goes is in larger cities. And you'll probably doing your common sense test, thinking about well, in larger cities, now there's Uber, and there's much more transportation options, including buses and, high speed or whatever is going on. But also, you might even know from your own grandchildren, how many of them are actually going and getting their driver's licenses? With social media and things and Uber and everything, they don't even want a license. They're at home on their computers or talking through social media. They don't meet at the malt shop anymore. So what I'm trying to get at is basically what we're talking about is pretty conservative here as far as our trip generation rates go. And also, the key takeaway, once again, is we looked at the background traffic in the area, and this is based on data from the city and from Charlotte County. It's nothing that I just pulled out of the air again. This is based on data provided within your community, Charlotte County, and the city of Punta Gorda. Then we grow that in our time horizon, which I said before was 2021, and that's a compounded growth rate of over 5% over 5 years, which is a lot of growth. Even after that, adding our trip generation, which we think is conservative, adding that background traffic, we are still within the adopted level of services that are within the city of Punta Gorda and Charlotte County codes. And I'll answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to address the two remaining issues that were raised. The first being the concerns about the parallel boat slips. I'll point out and included in the experts' report that you have policies within your comp plan that encourage additional slips in the facility. Objective 2B.1.1 of your coastal, 28.1.1 of your coastal management element, Punta Gorda will continue a development pattern which is characterized by the location of water-dependent and water-related uses in its waterfront areas. Objective 2, make sure it's a B or an 8. No, it's a B, actually. 2B 3.1, improve access from the waters of the Peace River and Charlotte Harbor to the city of Punta Gorda by improving the number and quality of boat slips, moorings, and shoreside support facilities for cruising boaters. And objective 2B.6.1, the city shall maintain and enhance its traditional economy in the areas of boating, fishing, and tourism. So your comprehensive plan, when you look at a proposal in consistency with the comp plan, you look at the entire comprehensive plan, there are a number of policies that you have that look to see increases in things like boat slips and mooring facilities. The other thing that I would point out, and this is a real concern for me, is that this is a rezoning, and the rezoning has certain criteria that you have to meet, and we came prepared to address those criteria. The city does have specific criteria for how you determine if something that is not the normal seawall or dock or boating facility, if it's out of your ordinary, they have criteria that talks about safety and whether it creates a safe environment, whether it impacts boating safety. We did not come prepared to discuss that because those criteria are contained in your code and incorporated into a separate process, which is the process that would approve those actual parallel boating facilities. Therefore, we have not introduced any evidence into the record. The staff report did not address it and has not introduced any evidence in the record. And I did not hear any testimony from the public that would be substantial competent evidence related to the safety of the boat slips. I understand that you have a concern with that, but that concern will be addressed in the processes and the procedures that you already have in place for doing so. So I would be very concerned if there was a vote that approved this but prohibited those parallel docks based on a concern for which you have not heard testimony, either from the applicant or really from the public, and certainly not from your staff. And finally, there were concerns and a lot of comments about overbuilding, and we're putting too much on this site, and the 400 plus units that we're proposing are too much, and that's why I pulled up this slide. This is, as I indicated, an actual Google slide. So what you see, that's Punta Gorda Isles, and that is indicative of the development versus the green space in Punta Gorda Isles. This is our proposed plan. Yes, we are proposing a large number of units, but when you look at this plan and you look at the green space that will be preserved and you look at how that looks in comparison to Punta Gorda Isles and the single-family development that surrounds it, judge for yourself whether what we're proposing is overbuilding of the site. We ask that you approve this proposed plan development. Thank you.
Now, we can entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously. I would just like to start to say we did meet with the developer when they had some, a semblance of this site plan when they were putting their application together. It was a very short meeting. We did not get into many details, but we did meet, and, they did show us some of what they're proposing here. And I do believe that they've taken in all of the consideration that we have given them over these two long processes. And I really think they have a unique product. And to the housing elements that we have in our comprehensive plan, I really do feel like this would be an addition. And, the site itself right now, it did suffer a little bit damage. I did drive by there. I don't know how many trees they lost, but it is very robust with natural vegetation. I mean, these are things that we've asked everybody that comes here with some kind of development to do, preserve the trees as much as possible. Plus, they're adding additional buffers, and I feel much more comfortable with the inclusion of this conceptual plan in the ordinance. So I would like to see that added whenever we take any action.
By way of clarification, when you used the word "we," you meant the council members met individually?
Yes, Howard and I met. I was with Howard.
Okay. Just wanted to make
We met with
sure
them.
that there was not a sunshine violation.
There was not.
I was all by myself.
I was with Howard, and that is legal.
So that the record is complete, if each council member can disclose their ex parte communications, I would appreciate that. I think that's required by law, and we that way have a
Yes.
complete record.
I did.
Individually.
Yes, individually.
I did not. I did not.
I did.
Thank you.
Yep. So, anybody else? Jaha?
All right, I'll say something. I'll give a little story. There was a story of this guy Narcissus, and he was cursed for viewing himself in the mirror in this pond, and where he'd be forced to look at himself. He looked at himself, and became so transfixed at his image that he ceased to eat and drink, and he died on the spot. Oftentimes, when they teach us this story saying that Narcissus loved himself too much. He didn't. He actually maintained his self-image at the expense of his self-reality. I say this because we are not as resilient a city as we like to believe we are. We believe we're in some fiscal position that we're not, and the public expects the public officials to act in a manner which is consistent with maintenance of the self-image, which is not true. I'll give you an example. When we talk about reserves, I did research on Margot Island, who just got impacted by Irma. They have 49% reserves. Key West, impacted by Irma, 19% reserves. Punta Gorda, 7.5% reserves. The minimum that the Government Finance Officers Association recommends a city have, and this is not talking about cities that are impacted by who knows what, storms, crazy madness, is 17.5%. And I say this because we often talk about preserving our lifestyle and our way. The only way we can preserve our lifestyle is if we're able to actually maintain our lifestyle in the midst of chaos, in the midst of uncertainty. And in this case, there's only 3 ways you really can actually do this, because we are not the city that we think we are. We have 200 less businesses than we had before Hurricane Charlie. Before Hurricane Charlie, the city was in stagnation, and we were significantly better off than we are right now as a city in terms of our fiscal position. The only way we can fix this is if we have 3 options. One is we raise taxes, which I think, since we're an older fixed income community, that's off the table. 2, cut services. We have very robust services I think we're very proud of, and no one wants to cut that. So number 3, the only other option we have would be to increase our commercial activity. And this is a very good example of a very, very well-designed means of increasing our commercial activity. Now, the thing I'm saying this is because we only have those 3 options. Is 1, 2, or 3. 1 and 2, I know the residents really don't want. Number 3, we have to have. And one thing when we come to this is that we often forget that Punta Gorda is 130 years old. Punta Gorda had a year-round economy for a very, very, very long time. It's only now that we have this seasonal thing. We only go a few miles north to Venice. Venice is a similar-sized city. They have a year-round economy. They don't have a season. They don't have a season because they have actual critical mass of enough businesses inside their city that people do not need to leave their city to get their needs met. And so when we're saying this is that everything we do to turn things down, we only hurt ourselves. We only make ourselves more susceptible to bigger problems. Now, with this said, to our north, we have Northport, which is very serious. We now have Charlotte Harbor, which is very serious. We have Babcock Ranch, which is very serious. We've managed to maintain a position of being the jewel on the crown simply by being the only city in the county. At this point now, we're the only place that's really not thinking about sustainability. I mean, we like saying sustainability, we're really not thinking about it. We actually have to act in a manner that we are important. Our people are important. We can't only think in this very, very sectional way. When we make decisions like this, we have to think about the actual macroeconomic effect that decision will have on the economy. If we think only about this neighborhood or this neighborhood, we forget that we're part of a greater body. And when we think of this, we have to think about this in a manner that this is good for Punta Gorda or not. This is something that is actually good for Punta Gorda. This is something that will help its residents live a more sustainable life. This will allow us to be able to get into a better fiscal position that we can actually deal with things. Like, for example, FEMA reimburses. It doesn't pay it front. If we were impacted in the way that Marco Island and Key West were, we wouldn't have the money to pay for it right now. And this is something we take for granted, that we just live in like this luxury land where everything is good. We don't. We're not this place. We're not 20 years ago. We actually, as a council, this past council's not ours, but in the past, they decided that having reserves was not important for the city, and so they're gone. And so now we're in a very, very fragile situation. This is something that we have to rectify. And so I just think that this is important. So with that said, the other side of this is, I took a trip recently. I had to fly a long way, so I printed everything out so I could really, really read this proposal in a very, very deep way. Our staff has a very, 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 very detailed description of exactly how this plan is consistent with the comprehensive plan, both the future use as well as the plan as a whole. And the thing about us is that when we're in a quasi-judicial hearing, we have three judicial tests that we have to follow as members. We have one, due process has to be preserved. Two, the competent substantial evidence to substantiate this. And three, the requirements of the law. This, no question at all, from a legal standpoint, the applicant has done everything that they were asked to do. Staff has confirmed, and we have expert testimony which says this is substantiated. We have everything we need. The answer, really, so according to the parameters we operate within, is yes. This is good for us within our parameters, and on a macroeconomic level, there's no question this is good for our economy. So I'm fully in support of it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'd just like to add a little bit to this.
Sure.
But I promise it won't be quite as long, because I have to celebrate my new year later tonight. Okay. In addition to what Jaha's saying, and also there was a comment about the price point of these condominiums relative to who we would be attracting, whether it would be children or not. I just would like to point out that there's discussion in the business community that a number of us have been involved in. We're a city that's soon going to be able to have another additional 4 million gallons of water a day. We're a city that has a very vibrant, expanding airport. There are a number of things that are happening in Punta Gorda that could be attractive to bringing other year-round businesses like around our airport, etc. However, what we lack is housing. And the fact is if you do bring in, if we're fortunate enough to attract a business other than a destination business, such as going to go across the harbor, which I think is great that it's coming. But if we're able to bring another Pulsa feeder in or another Cheney Brothers in, they will be employing professional people that this is in their price point. And this will allow a company to say, okay, we can come here and our employees can help find a place. This will just help augment that. And we have to keep those types of things in mind in the overall things. As my colleague has said, we have to keep the overall big picture in mind, and this is something that can augment other things that are happening within the community. That's it.
Nancy?
So in addition to what's been said, one of the goals has been to preserve the historic character of our community, and yet, as the late Vernon Peoples has said, we have to change. We can't stay stagnant, because if we don't change, we will die, as I think one of the people mentioned. As a community, we'll stagnate. And I've really looked very hard at the numbers and understanding the numbers of what our staff has presented and how things were calculated. And I think that what my perception is what has been presented is a pretty well thought out arrangement that is going to lower the impact on IKEA Star. I'm willing to let our processes take their place and let our canal maintenance or canal advisory committee examine navigation and things like that. But I think this could be a complement to the community and help us achieve many of our goals. And one of the goals we helped achieve this morning is when we had approved the first reading of the Walmart annexation. I think this would help us as well. I don't believe that what we are doing is selling out to a developer, as some people might insinuate. I think that what we're doing is examining a plan and looking at how it's going to contribute to the community. So.
Okay.
I see both sides of this. I would be much more inclined to give an approval to this process if there was a little bit of give on the part of the developer. I do feel that the comment I made earlier in the hearing where I asked about the 3 buildings that are on the waterfront, if that could be considered to be low-rise units, that would show an exercise of good faith on the part of the developer in that is the parcel, part of the parcel that is closest to the single-family homes that people have built over there. I do have a bit of a problem with that part of the project. I am absolutely adamantly opposed to a dry storage building being added to the site plan at this point. Number one, it's not part of the application, so therefore, I don't even think it should be considered in our discussions today. But I also think it's a very bad idea. I think it's going to be a horrible-looking building, another albatross right there, adjacent to the single-family homes if it's approved. All of that said, the application does meet all the criteria that the city has asked for, so I'm very torn about how I feel about it. I really am. I really am.
Okay, so now that we've all had our piece, we do need some kind of motion and.
Before you make a motion,
Yes.
I want to just go ahead
We're
and...
talking about making a motion. We're not making a motion.
Good form.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to read into the record my proposed revision to paragraph Roman numeral 3. That would be part of the ordinance if you were so inclined to adopt it. I'm just going to read it the way it should be revised, and it will come back before you in that form at second reading. The paragraph should read, except as limited by the approved concept site plan, those uses and development standards for the planned development village, PDV, attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit D, shall be permitted. City Council hereby eliminates the requirement for a minimum of 5% of the gross area of a planned development village, PDV, to be designated for shop front or workplace buildings, such as commercial uses on the subject site are not compatible with the surrounding community, and the proposed condominium community containing 23 buildings, a clubhouse and recreation area, parallel boat slips, and multi-slip docking facility more fully integrates the project into the existing neighborhood. The project shall be developed in accordance with the concept site plan attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit E, subject to all applicable governmental approvals.
Yes.
You might also wish to include in the motion the condition that the project shall be developed with shielded lighting.
And it's been brought up multiple times about pedestrian and bike trails, and I think there was a willingness to consider that. Is that something that we should ask for, or is that something that we should?
I wouldn't be comfortable with that right now. I mean, it seems like, this is a
concept.
private development, you know? At one point, we asked if it was gonna be gated or not. There's a possibility. You know, we just don't, without knowing what, if you're gonna move into a gated community, do you want bike trails? You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying it's off
I
the
understand what
table,
you're
but I
saying.
wouldn't want to bind it into the ordinance at this time.
Yeah, I think we would leave ourselves, because if it got binded in where the city, where if some of the property would be deeded back to the city, then the city has a maintenance issue that we have to also consider. So I think it's premature for us to discuss it at that time.
Yeah.
Although I would like to see us discuss this, obviously, in the future.
One of the options that might end up being mutually advantageous is if we, in discussions down the road, suggested to the owner of the property that by putting some of that area into conservation easements, they could get a tax break. At the same time, providing the public facilities might be advantageous. So these are things that remain open for future discussion.
And public is part of the permitted uses, so that's in here too, so it wouldn't be prohibited.
No,
But I would not like to see it bound in at this time.
no.
Okay.
So,
I'd like to make a motion for approval.
Second.
Subject to the amendments and
Yes, subject to
the
the
condition that
amendments.
was discussed.
Yes.
Second.
so we have a motion and a second to approve with the addition of the language, the Exhibit E, and the condition of shielded lighting,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Yes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Carried 4-1. We're gonna take another break. 12:49, so 1 o'clock.